So let's talk about some of the factors that govern capital structures. And the reason why I want to touch on this is because you will get resistance from investors. No matter what you propose, right? If you walked into an investor today and said, "Hey, I just need some money. I'm willing for all of it to be debt. Can you give me 5%?" They'll say, "I'll lend you the money, but I want 10%." They are always going to resist because they're gauging how much leeway they have with you, right? So even if you offer them the deal that you think they want to hear, they're going to test you. They're going to try to sweeten it a little bit and see if you'll say yes to that too. Not only do you have to resist this, but I want you to understand the arguments that they're going to raise to try to justify their position. You need to be aware of these arguments because you need to be prepared to counter them when they come up in negotiation. So let's talk about the business risk, first of all. Business risk is intrinsic to every business, right? The sales weren't what you thought they were going to be. You're not getting as many customers in the door as you hoped you would have. Tax rates increased, right? These are typical business issues that come up in every industry, including cannabis, right? This is more about an operational conversation and being conservative when you do your projecting and you're doing your pitching. Everybody knows that there are going to be business challenges. Anyone who's been an entrepreneur in the past will tell you that they go through this all the time. The environment changes. Case in point, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, if you were here in 2018, the money was free and loose. Now the capital markets have tightened. It's harder to bring in money. That is a change. Okay? You have to be able to talk about how you're going to handle those challenges. Investors challenges you and says, "Well, I'm not certain that you're going to do this level of sales that you're projecting." Your response might be, "Well, I know demand fluctuates up and down, but because you've done your research, you might say, well, there's two other retailers within 3 square miles, and they're consistently doing this level of business." Or you might say, "I understand your concern, but we've kept our numbers conservative. We believe that this is a very reasonable projection because we think we can do even better, but we wanted to present you with a more conservative outlook." Okay? Have your counter argument prepared for these sorts of challenges. But that also means you need to do your homework too. You need to know your numbers. You need to know your market research. And the more you own that, the more you can fire back at all of these challenges that may come up. All right. The other one I want to talk about is financial risk. And when I say financial risk, what people typically think of is your debt service. Are you going to be able to meet your financial obligations? But in this industry, it's often not limited to debt. I've seen a number of cannabis businesses get themselves in trouble because they didn't handle their tax funds the right way. Maybe the business is struggling, and some of that excise tax you collected went to pay employees. Okay? Or went to pay vendors that you were behind on. Could that trigger a business failure? It could. Right? So you're going to want to be conservative in your growth strategy. You're going to want to be conservative in how much demand you are projecting, right? You want to be conservative about your ability to repay not only your debts, but the other financial obligations on the business. And this financial risk will fluctuate depending on how much obligations you take on and how much debt is part of your capital structure. So again, balancing, like we said, is going to be really important. Financial risk is something else that's inherent to all businesses. It's not just cannabis. Okay. And then finally, the last one I'm going to talk about on this slide is the cannabis premium. When you're in cannabis, everything just costs more. Okay. For those of you who are getting into retail and have had to have conversations with landlords about commercial leasing, you know what I'm talking about. Because that same commercial space might be $2.50 a square foot, but the minute you tell them it's cannabis, it jumps up to $8 a square feet, $13 a square foot. I've seen leases here in LA, $25 a square foot, which is totally unsustainable in this industry. Your insurance premiums are going to cost more. Okay. You can't just go to Chase and open up a bank account. You're going to have to work with one of these companies that provide deposit services to cannabis businesses. They all charge a premium. It is the cost of doing business in this industry. Get used to it. The reason why I bring it up here is because when you're in that negotiation with the investor, they are going to use that premium a certain way. They're going to talk about that premium a certain way. In fact, they will talk about all these risks a certain way. And almost invariably all the time, the way they talk about these risks are your business is not as valuable as you think it is. Well, you didn't account for this much of the cannabis premium. Your business is not worth as much as it is. Well, there's a lot of risk in this industry right now. Other companies are going out of business. I don't think your business is worth what you think it is. I want all of my investment to be treated as debt because I have partners that I have to go answer to. But because of that, now your business is highly leveraged, so I don't think it's worth what you think it is. I'll sum all of that up to say they are talking down the value of your business. Why do they talk down the value of your business? So that they can push for a better deal. They may not believe half the crap that they tell you. You could have the cannabis premium spot on. They're going to talk about you missed the peg anyway. We talked about, in my example, how $1 million business raising 100,000 should offer 10%. Easy math, right? It changes if they say, well, based on our risk assessment, we think your business is only worth 800,000, not $1 million. So for my $100,000, instead of 10%, I want 15%. That's how these conversations go. An investor is always going to try to talk down the value of your business so that they can get a bigger piece of it. Okay? You need to be able to talk up the value of your business. As an equity operator, that's not as hard as you think it is. You have things going for you that non-equity operators in this industry don't have going. Case in point, I've talked about taking advantage of the DCR's resources that they make available to you. If you use your partner's attorney is going to charge between $400 and $800 an hour. Or they'll go get some fancy attorney from San Francisco and they're going to charge you $1,200 an hour. Okay? If you can get 10 hours with the DCR's low pro bono program and maybe an additional 10 hours at reduced fees, 30. This is value you can't buy, right? This is something that no other operator can take advantage of. If you can get grant money, let's say getting site control on a property is going to cost you $80,000. If you can get grant money to cover that, or even part of that, when other businesses have to shell it out, this is an advantage. You have to be able to talk about these things when those investors approach you and say your business is not worth what you think it is. Ask them, well, how long have you been in the cannabis industry? How much time have you spent with Equity Cannabis? Because I can tell you right now that between my fee waivers every year at the state, which could be anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000 in savings on an annual basis. If you could talk about tax rebates and tax credits that you may be eligible for. If you can talk about professional services that you get at low or no cost based on your status. All those are value increasing items. And so you have to be confident enough in your knowledge of your business and your knowledge of your proposal to push back on any of that conversation about your business is not worth what you think it is. The caveat there is that whatever you say your business is worth has to be reasonable. There's sort of a reasonability test that investors go through. And one of the easiest ways to do it, there's a number of websites that you can go to right now. Just Google buy a cannabis business in California. And there are brokers who are listing these businesses. And you can see what they're being sold for, whether they have a permit but no operation yet, all the way to they're fully operational. If you know what else is going on out in the environment and what these businesses tend to be worth, and you're reasonable about what you think your business is worth, it's going to be a lot harder for that investor to try to talk down your value to sweeten the deal for themselves. All right. Couple other things I want you to think about. Financial leverage. This is just using debt to further capitalize your business. I bring this up now because let's say you're able to get some equity capital in early on, and you need that second tranche of capital now. Maybe you're growing, maybe you're expanding. It's not necessarily the best position to be in to go straight back to the equity capital market. There is room for debt in this business. It's really just about getting the right kind of debt, not the predatory kind of debt, but the right kind of debt. And again, your leverage ratio is the amount of debt you have relative to capital coming in elsewhere. Don't get caught up on the vernacular. The language is not what's important here. But what's important is knowing that you can use debt to increase the value of your business and increase the value of your equity without having to dilute yourself further. So particularly on subsequent rounds of bringing capital in, particularly if you got equity capital in early on, then this is a tool that you should all be thinking about to bring in additional resources into your business, increase the value of your business without necessarily having to give up additional equity. So what you see on the screen here is an example of some of what I've been talking about. And what on the left side, you should see low leverage, and on the right side, you should see a highly levered business. I wanted this image in here to just clarify everyone's understanding of what I'm talking about. On the left-hand side, you will see that about 20% of their business is debt. And the business in this example is worth $1,000, 200 of it is debt. The same business, highly levered, is still worth $1,000, but now it has $800 in debt. Okay. Assuming that that debt can be managed and paid off, then the equity in the highly levered business is actually more valuable. It can be kind of counterintuitive to think about it that way. But the value of the business being $1,000, you have $200 worth of equity capital brought into it. Every dollar of equity capital there is worth more in the business. Okay. So again, just wanted to make sure that everybody saw a visual of what I'm talking about in terms of leverage and how that might impact the capital structure of the business. So, and here's another example. This is, what a typical capital structure might look like, right? Majority, the biggest chunk of this is an equity capital. The debt slice is relatively small. They minimize the use of early debt capital. This gives them the ability to go back to the debt market later on when they need that second or third round of capital, when it makes more sense to take on that debt deal. There is some preferred capital in here. And again, for investors who are seeking some sort of premium on their investment because this is cannabis, there's often a preferred section in there. And then other sources. Again, make use of the other capital sources that are available to you. The grants, the fee waivers, all of those things are part of your pie. All right, so how do we go about raising the capital? What you see on the page there is a very simplified version of what this looks like. You may recall I said that this is your offer. Regardless of who writes it, it is your business's offer. So you're going to want to prepare your financials. You're going to want to prepare your forecasts. You want to talk about your business organization, your team that you've been working to build. And for those of you who have not built a team yet, that's not determinative, but I'll tell you what, you better have an answer for how you intend to go about building your team, right? From those items, you're going to produce your investor presentation, what we call your pitch deck. Your pitch deck is going to be talking up your business, leading to the ask. I hope everybody in here knows what I mean about the ask. I have seen people come in and pitch their equity businesses and not ask for the money at the end of the presentation. You have to ask. You need to tell them what you want. If you just leave it hanging on, what do you think? You like my plan? They are not going to offer you what you think you want or you need, right? That also may raise questions about your capacity as a leader for this business. Now, maybe you don't want to be the CEO. That's fine. Make sure that you're able to talk about your plan to build the team and what sort of person you want to bring in for some of these key roles, right? But if you are going to be the leader in your organization, then you're that leader from day one. You're that leader publicly. You're that leader in every single conversation. And in this particular context, the leader needs to know the pitch ends with the ask. You have to ask for the money. Okay? So you pitch that presentation, you negotiate with the investors. It will typically result in a term sheet or a letter of intent. I'm going to pause right here because this is another pitfall that I see equity operators get into all too often. They're treating the term sheet or the LOI as the definitive deal, and it's not. Oftentimes, these documents are not even binding. And I can tell you from a legal perspective, we use these documents, term sheets, letters of intent, as stepping stones building towards a definitive agreement. I've even seen term sheets purporting to be binding. But one of the conditions in that term sheet might be that we eventually get to a definitive agreement. And so then the question raises, if we never close the loop on the agreement, how binding is that term sheet, even if it says it's binding? If we didn't meet all the conditions that would make it binding, can we rely upon it? The answer is maybe, but what are you willing to pay to find out? Because chances are you may have to litigate that issue. And there is no bigger waste of resources than you fighting with investment partners and potentially having to litigate these issues when really you could have just closed the loop and got to a final deal. So, yes, there is a process to this. There will be term sheets. There will be letters of intent. The deal is not closed until you have definitive legal agreements. And that agreement probably should not be one page. Probably not even 5-10 pages. I do get people coming into my coaching sessions or coming to office hours, and they're asking me, why can't this be one page? Why can't this be 5 pages? Do I really need all of this? I'm just going to simplify it for you. The answer is yes. Okay? Get to a definitive agreement that addresses all the terms that a business needs to address in its partnership agreements, in its financing instruments. If you need help, get the help that you need. Talk to that 280E CPA. Talk to that legal professional. I would advise everybody in this room, do not sign a legal document until you've had it reviewed. I don't care how quickly your partner wants to move. I don't care how much pressure they want to put on you. This is about protecting your rights. And I don't mean this negatively, but none of you know enough, right? They put pitfalls into these agreements. They'll tell you stuff like, why do you need to go use your attorney? I have an attorney on retainer. We'll use them. You need your own separate counsel on these things to point out what's in your interest and what's not in your interest. And if you have to go back to the negotiating table, that's fine. That's how these things work in every other industry. That term sheet, that LOI, that's just an acknowledgement of we agree on what we agree on so that we can move on to negotiating other points that we haven't reached an agreement on yet. That's what I mean by it being a stepping stone. And at the end of the day, you should have a definitive agreement that covers everything having to do with the subject of the agreement, whether that's a partnership agreement, whether it's a financing agreement. I know it's often frowned upon in some of these equity programs, but if it's a management services agreement, right? There are room for management companies in this industry. I think the hesitation there is that a lot of times they've been used predatorily. But at the end of the day, these are just all relationships that are papered up with legal documents. So get those legal documents reviewed. Don't sign anything until you've had it reviewed. Even if you're producing it yourself, which I wouldn't necessarily advise, but get it reviewed. Get some feedback on it. It's incredibly important. All right, so let's talk about some alternative investment strategies, right? So I want to talk about deferred equity and debt that's exchangeable. Okay. We've talked about how a lot of these investors will insist on their investment being treated as debt, and they want their equity too. Be prepared to offer them an alternative that maybe gets them part of the way to what they want, but also protects your interests. So again, deferred equity. What is deferred equity? It's a type of security, such as preferred shares or convertible bonds, that at some future date and time, at some fixed price, will convert into equity ownership of a business. And the same thing with debt exchangeable for common stock, otherwise commonly known as convertible notes, right? And what's unique about a convertible note is that you're acknowledging that the investment is a debt. You're acknowledging that there is a return that will be paid. There's some interest that will be on that note. And you're affording the investor an opportunity to become an equity holder. But they're not getting both at the same time. Okay? So they're sitting on this note, which you have an obligation to repay. This gives them an opportunity to test the water, so to speak. Is your business going to grow and develop the way you say it is? Are you going to beat your benchmarks? Are you going to fail to meet your benchmarks? This allows them to test the water. And if they like what they're seeing, they will have an incentive to convert that debt to equity. If they don't like what they're seeing, well, you still have to repay that debt, but you don't necessarily give up the equity to them. I would love to see more of this offer this alternative to those prospective investors that insist on their money being treated as debt. These are just more examples of some of these alternative structures. So preferred equity redemption stock. All right, this is stock that limits the value of the convertible shares, so it sort of fixes the price and time and when those shares convert. There are contingent convertibles, right? This is debt that converts to equity when you hit a certain milestone, right? When you hit X amount in profitability, when you have Y amount in revenue. These might be milestones that automatically convert that debt to equity. This is a great tool for you to use with investors who are insisting on their equity being investment, being treated as debt and want equity also. Right? Well, you have an opportunity to get equity, and if we hit the benchmark that we're telling you that we're going to hit, it'll convert automatically. There are a bunch of different tools like this. And I just want to emphasize we need to be creative about what we offer these investors because they're not going to be creative. They're going to offer you their one way of doing it. And the onus is on you to propose something in the alternative. So the last couple of slides, I want to conclude with just what to watch out for. In the finance industry, a predator is a slang term for companies that are going up and buying up and gobbling up all the other companies via either merger or purchase. This does happen in the cannabis industry. There's a lot of multi-state operators who want to partner with you and buy you out eventually and gobble you up. That may or may not be right for you. But there are more predators than just that, right? There are folks who are overconfident and overpromise. Yeah, I can bring you X amount of capital, and then they can never deliver. Or they'll offer you suspect deal terms or even commit outright fraud. So what you see on this last slide here are just some of the things to be on the lookout for. Some of the signs, if you will, of predatory behavior. Number one, they're a capital partner who's supposed to be bringing in the money, and they can't prove that they have the funds. This is a big problem. There's a lot of cannabis businesses that failed to even get out of the starting blocks because their capital partners promised to bring in a certain amount of money, and at the end of the day, for whatever reason, they couldn't do it. Another example, steering. Remember, I got a guy? When they tell you, I'll do the deal with you, but you got to be exclusive with my guy. And this is not just in inventory and supply. This could be in IP licensing. This could be in real estate leasing. It could be in management service agreements. And again, as I said, the vendor and service provider relationships. Unreasonably disproportionate financial preferences. I would make the argument that it's reasonable that if I'm putting up all the money and my partner's putting up none of the money, that I should be entitled to some sort of preference. Where it becomes predatory is when that preference is totally out of alignment with anything that would be reasonable. The common example is, I want 100% of my money to come back to me before you ever see a dime. That's common. That is a sign of predatory behavior, and that's probably not the partner you want to work with, unless they're willing to come off that position. Another example, preferences that never sunset. So they get their investment paid back, they get their return, and they still want that preference into perpetuity. If it's a debt deal and they want to penalize you for paying it off early, that's predatory. If they're asking you for a personal guarantee, knowing that you're under-resourced by definition, that's predatory. If they want a fee just for closing a deal, say they want to work it out with the landlord, but they need to charge you a fee to close the deal with the landlord, that's predatory. And then the hush deal, right? The side deal, right? That they don't want anybody to know about, particularly the DCR. That's predatory, okay? You want to avoid that. These are all telltale signs of something not good. And that concludes it, my presentation on structuring your business for investment.